All right, Josh. Let's talk a little bit preview action. This is going to be our last preview of the season. We wanted to get to Clemson, didn't get a chance to. Penn State is going to be the last one for us. Want to remind y'all, because we are doing cut-ups with these. Penn State fans and anybody watching this, please like and subscribe. We've had some people have some issues with getting notifications, so maybe uncheck and recheck the notification bell. We've got some huge announcements for this show coming up week one. It's related to something we're building off-site, off of YouTube, that you're going to want to be a part of. You're going to want to get your notifications when we put content out. So please like, please subscribe, get in the comments. And Penn State fans, share this where you talk football, message boards, Facebook, the Twitters. Helps us out a whole lot, and we're in helping out college football nerd season. All right, Josh, Penn State, we talked about them a little bit in a top 10 video. I think we roasted them a little bit. There's some interesting storylines with Penn State this year. They're ranked number 7. They've proven multiple years in a row under Franklin that they can be a quality team. And it's almost like, okay, they had the weird COVID year, but then it's like, we've established Penn State is one of the best teams in the country. They're a 10-2 team. For me, the storyline for Penn State this year is not that they have to win a national championship. They don't have to win the Big Ten. And I almost don't care if they drop a knucklehead game. They've got to beat either Ohio State or Michigan to feel like this year is a substantial move in the right direction. Am I right or am I wrong?
It does kind of feel that way because at some point under Franklin's tenure, you expect to take that step forward. And this is a thing we talk about a lot, right? And football is such a tiered sport. It's one of our complaints about the proposal for an expanded playoff. We'll see how it plays out. We're going to be right or wrong on that either way, right? It's going to get proven out, and we just didn't want to see it because we think the reality is the top 4 to 6 teams in a given year, really 3 to 6 teams in a given year, are so far ahead of everybody else that in a 12-team playoff, you're probably going to have a lot of uncompetitive games. I know we already do, but that's kind of the telling point. The teams that are uncompetitive now blow out everybody else. Penn State last year goes 11-2, 7-2 in the Big Ten, has a quote-unquote great season. But when you go back and look at it, right, they've got 2 games against – really, there were only 2 games that really mattered, which is the Michigan and the Ohio State game. They lose both of them. They lose them both by double digits. They beat Utah 35-21 in the bowl. There's other things going on there. Utah had injury issues. I'm also not sure how good Utah really was. I know, they win the pack or whatever. But, even USC, I think, the game versus Tulane wasn't as much of a fluke as people want to make it out to be. The whole other discussion there. But the Big Ten has become where the SEC was for several years. It's very top-heavy. Penn State is beating most of the conference, which I think is average to good. And then there are a few teams that are top-end elite, and Penn State is continually beating the teams below them and getting blown out by the couple of elite teams ahead of them. Is that good enough? We had this discussion a couple of years ago with Michigan, right? We talked about what is good enough if you're Michigan? Are you happy with going 11-1, 10-2, losing to Ohio State, being in a BCS bowl or a playoff New Year's Six Bowl, and not really being a contender for a championship? And they took a step forward, and that step was a big step. They're a lot better than they were. I think Penn State's in the same boat. They've got to take that step. If they take a step back, you fall the middle of the pack in your conference pretty quickly. But to take a step forward, really, it's not just like a step. In terms of quality, they got to get like 2 steps better to win 1 more game, and that's a daunting task. And whether or not you think they're a good team or whether or not you think we're hating on them really depends on your expectations for taking that step forward and how much you think they should or how much you think they need to.
I've got a little positivity action I'm going to throw your way on Penn State, and it's something that we really project onto how we judge playoff teams, and it's how dominant a team is against average to inferior competition. Penn State last year, outside of the 2 losses to Michigan and Ohio State, only had 2 games where they didn't win by 2 scores or more. To me, that is something that hasn't been a hallmark of Penn State recently. So really hiding under a lot of the got to beat Michigan, got to beat Ohio State, radar is, hey, Penn State is quietly handling their business in a way that they haven't done for years or, under Franklin. And I think that might be a tell about the direction they're headed. Now, I know there's some turnover this year at quarterback. There's some turnover in some pieces, skill positions. But to me, being able to be dominant against mediocre or even good competition is a mentality thing, it's a talent thing, and it's an experience thing that Penn State has now, which gives me a little bit of sign to optimism for this year.
Right. Yeah. The only two games they didn't win by 2 touchdowns or more were Purdue and Northwestern. Purdue was the opener, kind of a weird game, right? As openers often are, and even Northwestern was early in the year, and they still won by 10. Again, kind of an odd game in its own respect. But it says a lot that they dominated the rest of the schedule, and that's where I don't think they're lumped in with the rest of the Big Ten. I do think they're one of the elite teams in the Big Ten. The question is, do you think there really is a gap with the other two, and how high do you think they are? Where do you think Penn State is? Penn State is the hardest one to slot in because I don't know I don't know that there really is another team in the Big Ten that's really, in terms of quality, even top 15. But Michigan and Ohio State are top 4. And where do you put Penn State if they're better than everybody else and they're not as good as the other two? Does that mean they're 6th or does it mean they're 14th, right, in quality? And we struggle with that every week, and they're constantly flirting around 10th for us, just like they are in FPI, the AP poll, and everything else, because we're just struggling to deal with it. But you're right. I mean, the domination does indicate that there is a pretty significant gap between them and the other teams in the conference. And I think something that flies under radar is in many ways they've actually dominated the other teams in their conference more than Michigan and Ohio State have at times, which says a lot. There's this huge segment of Michigan's fan base that still bitter after Penn State played Michigan for us talking about how Penn State in that Penn State-Michigan game last year was actually more competitive than the score, right? I think I said, like, at halftime, Penn State was leading, and the reality was Penn State took the lead in the first drive of the second half, which obviously, one, means that I knew what happened in the game. I just wasn't looking at a box score, but I remember them leading to start the second half. But, that was a 17-16 game in the third quarter, and then Donovan Edwards had a 67-yard run, and then Corum had a 61-yard run back-to-back, and all of a sudden Michigan was up 31-17 and sort of able to grind them down at the end of the game. But my point there is they dominated everyone else. They had one game that I think left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths because they got blown out. But from a competitiveness standpoint, they went toe-to-toe with Michigan for the majority of that game. And so I don't know that the gap actually is that significant. And if it's easy to talk about how, like, the receiving core, when we had our burn session, I don't know that there's anybody in this receiving core that really scares me, right? There's no Dotson. And you talk about elite wide receivers to win a national title. I don't know that they have one. Georgia hasn't had one. But again, I don't know that Penn State's goal at this point is to win the national title, but to be in the playoff contention. But is that different than Michigan? Is there a receiver at Michigan that really scares me? I don't know. I mean, it's actually really hard when you look at the running core with Singleton and Katron Allen, the talent potential of Allar. Why is this team really thought of that differently than Michigan? Where are the huge disadvantages? And the more I think through it, the more I look at the results in the season, I think it starts to feel really disingenuous that we view them in such a different light. Because I really don't think the gap is that big. It's just a matter of whether or not you can get over the hump and actually win the game, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of Penn State fans were super high on Parker Washington. He didn't go in the first round for a reason, and that's not a bad thing. Like, I think there's a silver lining there to think, like, when some teams lose first round elite plus wide receivers or running backs or quarterbacks, they have a huge fall off the next year. I don't think it's going to be that hard to replace Parker Washington's 611 yards that he got last year. What they've got coming back that nobody's talking about is a legit running back room. We talk about Big Ten playing a lot better football than maybe they were a decade ago or whatever. Big Ten is up there with the SEC. They're a great conference. I don't think they're quite as good as SEC depth wise, but they've got good teams. And Singleton just ran through the Big Ten, 6.8 yards per attempt, and he carried it 156 times. We're not talking about a guy that came in backup duty and popped a couple of big runs. Nicholas Singleton is a dude. And I think at quarterback, this is the same situation as Parker Washington, and even Penn State fans will probably appreciate this. We were never high on Sean Clifford. And coming into this year, even though we've made some comments about being concerned that Drew Allar only put up 5.7 yards per attempt last year, which is it's a fair concern. 58% completion rate, like he wasn't great in backup duty, but that not all quarterbacks are. Some of them just need the reps to be good. I don't see them having a fall off at quarterback. You might get a few more interceptions, although Clifford made his knucklehead throws too. But I think what he's going to bring to the table that Clifford didn't have is specific arm talent, being able to throw wide receivers open in a way that I never saw Sean Clifford do. I think there'll be some step back in experience and maybe in decision-making and totally owning the offense and maybe in that huddle being the leader. But as a pure talent guy and as a pure talent team, I don't see them being, let's not compare to everybody else in college football. Let's compare to Penn State last year who went 10-2 or 11-2. I don't see that big of a drop-off with the pieces that they lost.
Yeah, and their context is everything in college football, and there's so many little things. And look, we get stuff wrong. We get stuff wrong all the time. We talk about a lot of games, and it's always kind of funny when people want to pick up one thing we said that either was objectively wrong, which does happen, or sometimes things that are subjectively wrong, and ignore everything else we were right on, right? And with Penn State, I feel like when you look at the context, it's easy to explain away and talk about why positivity would be wrong or why negativity would be wrong based off some other, factoid that offsets things. Like I talk about the receiving core, right? But there's two transfers. Now, one of the transfers, McLean, he wasn't a big-time receiver at FSU, and he's probably going to help with depth, but my expectations haven't been that high. But Dante Cephas was a good player for Kent State. Had some injury issues were the biggest thing holding him back, and he may be a big boon to that receiving core, which otherwise should get older and better. You talk about Allar and his yard per attempt numbers. Well, the Michigan game's a great example, right? Clifford goes out. That move where it went from 17-14 to 17-31 in Michigan's favor, during that period, Clifford goes out of the game. Allar comes in, and now he's playing in catch-up mode, down 17 points, having to press. That's a bad position for a quarterback to be in. You tend to look bad. He wasn't prepared to come in. And then those numbers affected a lot of his season stats because he played a couple times in mop-up duty in games where he's playing for Clifford who was either ineffective or banged up. I think if they can just be a team that continues to put themselves in a good position, if they're more committed to having a particular identity as an offense, then I think Allar gives you some real benefit because if you're a play-action football team running the team through the running backs, what you really need is a quarterback that can consistently hit a target that's open downfield. You don't need a guy that's having to make 1,000 reads. You want a guy that, drops back, fakes the handoff, turns, he's got the guy in the post, and he just hits him. And I think Allar has the potential to be that guy for Penn State, and we've talked about it a lot with different players. Matt Corral at Ole Miss was a good example. Really not a great quarterback when you asked him to run the whole offense. There's a reason he's not starting the NFL. But in an offense where he was used to throw shot plays, even though a lot of the times the offense all ran through him and he was throwing every play, the thing is, Lane Kiffin was going to set up whoever he wanted to have open to be open, and he just wanted him to make the throw. And Corral could make the throw. And I think you may see the same thing. I think Clifford was probably better at running the offense overall. Coaches love those guys, I think often to a fault. But if you limit Allar's role, in a limited role, he's actually a lot more effective than Clifford because Clifford's probably going to miss that 40-yard deep shot more often than he hit, just due to issues with his arm mechanics and just consistency as a passer. Allar may not manage everything else as well or may not be as advanced as Clifford as a senior, but Allar is going to hit that deep shot 70+% of the time. Give yourself an opportunity. And now you've got that real counter. And in that limited role, he can be ultra effective. And that makes the run game more effective. And suddenly the offense can be a lot more efficient and effective even though Aller may not be as good a quarterback overall, if he had to throw the ball every play and run the whole offense, in the role he's at, he's more effective than Clifford was. He just by doing less, he does better than the guy that tried to do more.
So you talk about Penn State having an identity, and I think that they've really found it in a lot of ways in being a physical team. If you look at, if you dig into stats and you watch the games, Penn State has shown at times that they can really bully people. And I know these are not good teams. Well, Maryland was a pretty good team, but two teams that aren't great defensively, Maryland and Auburn. Penn State dominated both of these teams. And where they really dominated, so Talia threw for 3.4 yards per attempt. He had 74 yards passing, which is wild. But the big number to me that was interesting was 1.6 yards on the ground rushing per attempt. Auburn, a team that could run the ball, ran it for 3.3 yards at home against Penn State. That's a team that I think that met their match against Michigan ultimately. And to Michigan's fans' credit, the thing that they're saying a lot on the big plays, same thing with the Ohio State game, same thing with Penn State game last year. A lot of us talk about, but for these 3 or 4 plays, you don't win the game, or you were right there with the other team. And they're like, well, hey, wait, that's who we are. Those big plays are who we are. Donovan Edwards busting it for 67 yards. If he does it enough, that shows that's who we are. And I think that they were able to out-physical Penn State late in that game. What's interesting to me is they can lean into that identity and beat Ohio State, in my opinion, this year. But what I think will be the real tell is they start the season at West Virginia or against West Virginia. They should dominate that team physically. West Virginia wasn't a bad team last year, but they weren't great. They should dominate them, in kind of like the Maryland game last year. What's really interesting to me is after their FCS game, which I want to note, Big Ten teams do play FCS teams, but apparently because they play them in September and not in November, they're good. They're good games. Penn State plays at Illinois versus Iowa back to back. Those are two very physical teams with really good defenses. People don't understand how good Illinois' defense was last year, and a lot of people in SEC country dismissed their number 1 defensive ranking. That team was legitimately good on defense. I don't care who you put them up against. They were legitimately good. Iowa, always legitimately good. So it'll be interesting to see if they can handle teams who, with a new quarterback, who are comfortable playing 17-13 type games, 9-6 type games. If they can really step it up and out physical teams, especially that have physical defenses, to set that identity for the year, I will be really interested to see, because out of the gate, there's 3 data points in 4 weeks for Penn State where we don't have that for a Michigan. We don't have that for a Georgia. I'm pretty excited to see it for Penn State.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's one of those things where I think they should beat those 2 teams because neither one of those teams has particularly good offenses. But those sorts of games are great tests to see who they are, right? We're going to take some things away from those games. And the thing, and there were 2 teams they didn't have to play last year, right, with the way the schedule fell. But the thing I think that's interesting with Penn State is that they've really, I think, built themselves to try to stop better teams. They are a lighter team. One of the concerns in the Rose session, which this cuts both ways, and now it's more the positive, right, is they're a lot lighter in their front 7 than a lot of other teams in the Big Ten. But they're kind of built to deal more with the Ohio States of the world. And like shutting down Maryland, which is an RPO-based team, not overly physical, even though they run the ball a lot, they can be disruptive and can be quick and reactionary. Can they hold up against the more physical teams? Because the trick is you've got to hold up against those teams in conference play. But if you're really good and you're able to do that, you're positioned a lot better to deal with Ohio State or maybe sort of Michigan. But the whole trick is, you've got 2 very different styles you got to beat. Ohio State is less physical, schematically, stylistically, more dynamic. They put more receivers on the field, if you want to think of it that way. I don't mean it as a slight. And so you got to be lighter. You got to be more athletic to deal with all their multiple formations. And you have Michigan, which has kind of exploited a lot of teams like Ohio State because they've gone straight into murder ball, pound and ground, old school Harbaugh Stanford mode. And I think some defenses haven't been well equipped to that. I think they wore down Ohio State in the second half. They wore down Penn State in the second half because they're not really built to stop that kind of team. How those Illinois and Iowa games go is going to really tell, I think, whether or not they've taken the step they need to take to be able to go toe-to-toe for 4 quarters. And it's going to be hard given the size. And they've got some bigger guys, I get it. But, starting defensive lineman at 280 is not, or defensive tackle at 280 isn't really a normal thing in college football these days if you want to be a big, dominant physical football team. So they're going to have a mentality and an identity to them, I think, to win. And you're going to see whether or not that's there early. And I'm going to give a lot of graciousness to the offense as they break in a new starting quarterback. But, things have got to settle in, and then you get Ohio State midseason, Michigan late. And it's otherwise a pretty manageable schedule otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it's manageable, as you say, to make a bowl. It's kind of tough to make the playoffs because they got Michigan and Ohio State. It is interesting because if there's a round robin of everyone beating everyone, then let's say Penn State goes 1-1 against those two teams, but doesn't play, but finishes second in the Big Ten East, and doesn't play for the Big Ten championship. They might be, depending on how everything else shakes out, they might be slotted pretty well to make the playoffs, because we've seen that happen to other teams in the past who lose to an elite team but beat an elite team, even though they sit at home. They have an opportunity. Josh, I don't want to do predictions for Penn State, but in your opinion, will we know what we need to know about Penn State before they play Ohio State and Michigan? As we talked about, there's a lot of data that can come out of those games, especially given the style of play they have. Are we still sitting back and saying, okay, the theme for Penn State this year is you got to beat Ohio State and Michigan, and we already know that you're good, so really nothing else to learn about Penn State until that game against Ohio State on October 21st?
I think you're going to learn something about the offense because they're going to be tested and it's going to make them better. But defensively, they don't play. I'm not even sure they're going to play a competent offense before Ohio State. West Virginia is by far the best, and then Delaware, at Illinois, Iowa, at Northwestern, and UMass. Those are, I don't even look at the statistics, but I guarantee you there's bottom 30 or more, four or more bottom 30 offenses in that group. So there's also going to be the potential for sort of a culture shock moment defensively when you play at Ohio State, Indiana, at Maryland, and Michigan all lined up in a row. I don't think we're going to completely know who they are. We're going to learn a little bit about the offense. I think they may be tested more early than they even will be in those games. But defensively, whether or not they can hold up, which was kind of the issue in the 2 losses last year, we are not going to know. Even I can tell you right now, I don't know that I'm going to know anything more on October 20th than I do today, and whether or not Penn State's going to be able to hold up. So something to watch for on the offensive side of the ball for Penn State, and then the defensive side is going to be very much a wait and see.
All right, so you have given some love to all your Penn State people by doing a preview. We've given fans of the program like Stephen Light and others who are begging for a Penn State preview some love. Let's part this preview with the classic Nerd Josh positive spin that you like to put on everything. Give us one upshot, one summary for Penn State this year, what you're looking for, and what it means to you if Penn State, what it'll look like if we say at the end of the year Penn State took that next step.
Well, yeah, I mean, most people do know me as Captain Positivity. I do. I usually wear rainbow stickers on my forehead during the day just to sort of brighten up the room. I think the thing that they're going to have to do to take a step forward is people are going to say that they were physical. This is a team that returns the entire offensive line, that has great running backs. They're going to need, I think the statement is going to be, they were this year what Michigan was last year. That's the identity they need to have if they're going to be a playoff caliber team, just based on the way this roster's built. And there are a lot of transfer pieces on all these rosters, and Penn State has them too, and those pieces will have to click and be important components. But they've got to embrace being Michigan. And that's going to be a big make or break thing, I will say, for James Franklin. And if they can step forward that's going to really change the way he's perceived. And if they don't take that step forward, to be typical Josh, I think it's going to really cement his legacy in the minds of a lot of Penn State fans.
I think for me, it's going to be that Drew Allar stepped in and improved their passing game from where they were the last couple of years. He's an unknown right now. I think from a talent standpoint, just watching him throw the ball, he really impressed me last year. The numbers didn't match up, and we've commented on that. But if he can step in and improve that passing offense in general, 20% more from what they were last year, 15% more. I think the issue with Penn State last couple of years has been inability to consistently move the ball and stress a team throughout the course of the game versus hitting some shots on play action or whatever and scoring some points in bunches. They need a consistent, lethal offensive attack. And if they can do that, then they're going to win one or both of these games that we see that they need to win. I think they're going to win one. I don't think they'll win two, but I'm picking them to win one of those two this year. All right, y'all, that's it for us on Penn State. For our preview, we'll probably be proven wrong, everything we said just now, but let us know in the comments where we're wrong. Let us know in the comments what you think about Penn State this year. Remember, like, subscribe. It's going to help us out a ton. Share this video where you talk sports, especially a Penn State message board or two. YouTube loves that. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. Looking forward to this college football season with y'all. And God bless.